My mission is Ariel, and I'm the president of the Baker High School Alumni Association. I'm here with Mr. Phil Reynolds, class of 1968, and he was in the Army. And Phil, you graduated in 68, and how soon after you graduated, what made you join the Army?
Well, got my draft notice.
Oh, that's a good reason.
And at that time, they were drafting you within 30 days of receiving the letter. So I went down to my local recruiter. I was an Army brat and used to go out to yak out there at the, team club. And Ma Frazier was out there and she was running the place. And I heard another guy was talking about he was going to join up to be an MP. And I said, that sounds great. I said, no combat, no out in the jungle, stuff like that. So I went down to my local recruiter and told him I wanted to be an MP. He says, no. He says, you don't want to be an MP. He says, we got 4 slots open for helicopter pilots. He says, let me send you up to Atlanta and they'll test you up there and see if you qualify. And I said, well, that sounds pretty good. When I was much younger, my older brother and I, Steve, we used to love to watch whirlybirds on TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they were Korean veterans that were in business flying helicopters for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were just real whirlybird junkies. And in fact, he watched it so much that he put together the sequence on how to start an H-13 helicopter, the bubble nose with the erector set on the back. And we were at a display on 4th of July out at Fort Benning, and he walked up to the pilot and he says, I know how to start that. He said, really? He says, yeah. And he sat in the pilot's seat and he says, you twist this right here, which was the throttle on the collective, and he says, you push these 2 levers up, which was the carburetor heat, and you twist this knob right here, which was the magnetos, and then there's a button on the floor, kind of like a blinker button or high beam button, and he says, you stomp on that, and you're started. And he says, you're right. So that was it. But I was the one that wound up going into the service to be a helicopter pilot, and he was 4F. He had a rib missing, and he had bad feet, and so he just didn't make it. But anyway, I went up and tested, and they cut me orders to flight school before I even got sworn in.
Okay, let me ask you this question right now. Did you go with a helicopter because you figure, well, I don't have to go into combat?
Oh, no.
The reason I'm asking that question, we had this fighter pilot, Lenny.
Yeah.
And he said he was in college, and he said, oh man, if I go to flight school, I don't have to go fight, Vietnam. Well, he ran over 166 missions over Vietnam.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
That's it. But I mean, but I had orders to flight school before I even got sworn in.
My goodness.
And they were serious, and so my time came, and the first time I was ever in an airplane, I flew back up here to Atlanta, and then they flew me out to Fort Polk, Louisiana, for my basic training.
It's a good place.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's considered the armpit of the Army sometimes. But anyway, so I did 8 weeks there, and then my AIT, which was not infantry training, was flight school in Fort Walters, Texas.
Okay.
And I got a special dispensation or whatever to drive my own car from Fort Polk to Fort Walters, Texas. My parents brought it down to Fort Polk.
Okay.
And what have you. My dad, he was in the service. He was a master sergeant, and he taught radio electronics out at Fort Benning.
Okay.
So whenever he went on a hardship tour or what have you to Iraq or Korea, or Iran it was, he always came back to Fort Benning because that was the only school that taught radio electronics.
I have several friends, including my dad.
Mm-hmm.
We go somewhere and wind up back at Fort Benning.
Yep, yep.
Was your dad here back in 1962, 63?
Oh, yes,
I bet you that's a good chance your dad knew my dad.
probably so.
Yeah, my dad was a post sergeant major, and if your dad was a master sergeant, we all went to the same club.
Oh, wasn't much of a clubber.
Well, no, they go to the club to play bingo.
No,
That's what they all did.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
But anyway, so went out there and I got checked in early, and then the buses showed up the next day with a bunch of fresh out of the basic training guys. Some of them I knew. And we had chief warrant officers that were acting like the meanest drill sergeants you'd ever seen. And they were officers, so this was a step above an enlisted man with, an E5 or an E6 yelling at you to get off the bus and that sort of thing. So that was pretty amazing. And
they were yelling in a nice manner, I'm sure.
yes, no foul language or anything. Yes, and anyway, so we got assigned to a really nice billet, and they had cubicles, open cubicles.
Oh.
Okay, and there was two guys to a cubicle, and they were bunk beds, and they had your wall lockers right there. And you just put your stuff in there, and you got it all arranged, even your sock drawer and your underwear and all this sort of stuff. And that was the last time you touched it, because you lived out of your wall locker, which was around the corner. So whenever you got up in the morning, that's where your dump bag was, and everything else that you were going to wear that day, including your boots.
So how long was your AIT for?
AIT at Fort Polk was 8 weeks.
Okay.
That was just,
And then you went, then you qualified to go train, yeah, okay.
that was just the basic.
Yeah. And
then
so
we
you were in Texas at this time?
Fort Walters, Texas.
And how long were you there?
For 20 weeks.
20 weeks.
And that was for basic helicopter training. I learned how to fly on an H-13. Okay, but they had some Hughes 55s and some Hillarys
Okay.
that they also used. These were all piston engine helicopters, two-seaters.
So in your time, in my time, an officer was required to have some college behind him.
At the time, it was not required.
Okay.
They just tested you. And if you passed, if you had good enough marks, their cutoff, they had a flight aptitude statistics test, or whatever, they call it a pass test.
Mm-hmm.
The cutoff was 250 on the score.
Okay.
There was a poor guy there that made 249. They just would not even consider talking to him.
Mm.
And they took me in to interview, and they were kind of talking down to me a little bit, like I wasn't, the sharpest knife in the drawer. Come to find out, I made a 375 on that test, which was one of the higher scores. But it was just You know, they were just trying to pick me apart, see what my nerves were like.
So from Texas, where you go to?
I went from Texas to Fort Rucker, Alabama. And there we got into the Hueys. Okay, and learned how to fly turbines, which were Hueys, and what have you. And that was a whole different thing. Let me back up a little bit. When I got to Texas, I was immediately promoted to Spec 5 when I got there. As soon as we started flying, 4 weeks later, I got Spec 5 pay plus enlisted aviation pay.
Oh boy.
Which was pretty nice. You know, so that went on for, you know, the duration of the 36 weeks.
The reason I'm asking about the college, one of my, well, he was like a brother to me, and for my class, they went to North Georgia College,
Right.
military college, and he had a degree, and then he joined then in the Army, he went to helicopter school, and
Well, that was a little different back then. You were talking about a commissioned officer,
yeah,
and in order for you, they had OCS and stuff at Fort Benning,
yeah,
you know, but they did want to have college. You know, I went in through the warrant officer program, which didn't really require.
exactly. That's exactly right. I've forgotten about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, we did that and what have you, and it was something else going.
What I've learned about that was I talked to guys that were warrant officers, but then they get ready to retire.
Yeah.
So they went back to their regular rank because they got paid more as a regular rank than they did as a warrant officer. That's what they told me.
Well, it just depends.
I'm sure.
You know, I've heard of some people that were a major, so to speak, during World War II, and then when they retired, they went back to their previous rank, and vice versa, whichever one was higher. I knew sergeants that had been captains, and they retired as a captain instead of a sergeant, you know, because they got more pay.
Sure.
And they were referred to as an officer. But
so after Fort Benning, Fort
Rucker.
I get thank you.
Yeah.
After Fort Rucker, where you wound up going to?
Well, I had a 30-day leave,
Oh.
you know, and then I wound up going to Oakland, California to catch a big bird over to Vietnam. You know, 30 days. Now we had one guy in our flight that his dad was, I don't want to say he was a senator, but he lived next door to a senator. Okay? And so everybody got orders to Vietnam except him. And he got his postponed for 6 months. So when we were over there and had already done 6 months, he was just coming over as a new guy. So he had 12 months ahead of him, and we only had 6 months left, you know, to do the tour. But we got to California, and we waited to get on the flight manifest. And it took 3 days. And they put the officers up in different quarters than the enlisted.
I remember this, I think. In Pleiku,
Okay.
they had a helicopter, transporter helicopters in there. That's what my dad was at.
Okay.
Whereabouts in Vietnam where you're at? All over?
Well, no, not necessarily. Our rear area was in, well, we had the receiving area where which was near Saigon, Long Binh, all right? And so they came over and they collected me up and took me back to the rear area there and waited for somebody to come down from the forward front line. And a day later they came down and picked me up.
But in Vietnam, you flew Hueys.
I flew Hueys initially,
Mhm.
and then I got transitioned into Loaches, OH-6 Alphas.
Okay.
Little 4-man, bubble nose, Hughes. It's a Hughes 500 is what it was.
Okay. The way you describe it, I can see him now, but if you give me a number, I'm lost.
Yeah. Little
Yeah.
bubble nose, you know.
Yeah.
And they flew like a sports car compared to the Huey. You know, you just dart in and out and what have you. And
Was there any time you remember the first mission that maybe you encountered fire or something like that?
oh, first time out. Yeah, we were flying in a Huey with the executive officer of the 1st Squadron. I was assigned to the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, 1st Squadron.
Okay.
And our duties were to fly the old man, the commanding sergeant major, and the executive officer around. We were there just personal transportation. We did command and control, you know, from the air and what have you. And he'd fly around and he'd, you know, see where all the troops were located. And if they got in contact, sometimes he would direct them from up above or what have you, or give them suggestions and that sort of thing. And we were just out flying around, not too far from what was the Tactical Operations Center at the top. And that was up in a place called Loch Ninh, which was 20-something miles from Quan Loy, which is where I was initially. That was our forward area. Okay.
What was your first thought when you realized they're firing at you?
Well, the aircraft commander, who was well seasoned, he'd been there for probably 6 months anyway. He just turned it sideways, and we were looking at the fire coming at us from outside the door, the back door. We flew with the doors open, and we could see the tracers coming up toward us a little bit. And the major started calling in artillery. And this was the weirdest thing. And I saw exactly where the fire was coming from, and he started calling artillery in about 500 yards away. I said, isn't this guy smart? He is putting artillery in their path of retreat. That wasn't the case. He just didn't see where the fire was coming from. And I told my aircraft commander later, when we were on the ground, what I thought was going on, and he said, that wasn't what was happening at all. You should have said something. Because he didn't see where the fire was coming from, and apparently you had a better look at it than he did, and he was supposed to be putting it right on top of where, you know, the tracers were coming up from. But he learned a little lesson right there.
You know, I've spoken to several people. My dear friend Kenny, he was shot down 3 times, and a lot of us come to the conclusion, probably more, that the most dangerous job in Vietnam was in a helicopter, because you're being shot at, you know.
Well, they were considered bullet magnets, and when you had a combat assault and you were in a slick and you dropped your troops out, they wanted to get away from that thing as quick as possible.
That's right. Exactly right.
And you wanted to be out of there as quick as possible. So you had both things going for you at the same time. They wanted to get away from it, and you wanted to get out of there. So less time on the ground and what have you. So that was it. I applied for and got a direct commission when I was over there after about, I want to say 3 months. Okay, and my promotion came through as a second lieutenant from a W01 warrant officer and what have you. And so I was just, you know, kind of fat, dumb, and happy, and I'm a commissioned officer, you know, and I could see making a career out of it. and what have you, and I wanted to be able to, rise up in the ranks a little past W4 as a chief warrant officer. And what have you. About 6 months in, we had a captain that also took a direct commission. He was in charge of our flight. We had 6 pilots in the first squadron. We had 2 Hueys and 2 Loaches. We flew 1 Huey and 1 Loach each day.
And Loaches are Bubba?
The bubble nose.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. And the others were either down for maintenance or that we just didn't fly them. That's all that we needed out in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And what have you. And then after about 6 months, I got transferred to the Air Cav Troop, which was the main air support for the entire regiment. Okay, they had the slicks there, which is what I went into first, and we did combat assaults, with 10 or 12 Hueys at a time, and what have you. And then I did that, not too long, 2, maybe 3 weeks at the most. And then they converted me to hunter-killer teams, which was kind of nice, I thought, because we had a minigun hanging off the side of this Loach, and I had a Cobra helicopter up at 1,500 feet, circling around waiting for me to, pop smoke, find some bad guys, what have you.
At Fort Campbell, I jumped out of some Hueys. But one thing I witnessed, and a dear friend of mine, he's sharing, we were at Fort Campbell at the same time.
Yeah.
We went 2 different units. But right between our units, I was in a motor pool. You know what a mule is in the Army?
Oh, yeah.
I had a mule.
Okay.
And I could, the Hueys got the thing sound, pop, 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 pop,
Yeah.
And then we heard a backfire. We knew that something was wrong. And we looked up and then he started kind of rotating. And he hit the ground. And there was about 10 of us. We jumped the fence, running hard to get to him. We couldn't get too close to it. The heat. I couldn't believe the heat of the helicopter on fire.
Really?
We couldn't get that close to it at all. I'm thinking we couldn't get within 75 to 100 yards from it.
Wow.
It was putting that much heat. And then I realized how dangerous that could be.
Yeah.
So how long were you in Vietnam?
365 days. I tried to get out early. I went to down to Saigon to debarkation a week early. They never called my name. But there was another little thing that we did in March of '70. President Nixon said, "Why don't you guys go over into Cambodia and deplete their supplies over there, And so we were over there for 2 months, sanctioned, and what have you. And while I was over there, I kind of got into a scrape or two. And I don't know about you, but that's a bullet hole right there.
Oh boy.
It went through my earpiece and out the back.
Good God Almighty.
And I didn't even know it until I had landed. And I started lining up the bullet holes in the helicopter, and there was a place behind my head in the door frame, and there was one right square in the middle of the bubble. And I lined them up. I said, my head should have been in there somewhere. And I picked this up, and I rolled it around, and there it was.
Well, I can compare that to Trump.
Yeah.
When he got shot, the hand of God was in both of you guys.
Yeah.
The hand of God was there,
Yeah.
I know that his hand was over my head all my time.
Yeah.
And even up to date.
Yeah.
And so then you get out of the service then, or do you retire?
No, ask, we had a major who was in charge of the battle damage assessment report team who took pictures and wrote about all the battle damage, not only on helicopters, but mostly on the tracks, the tanks and armored personnel carriers like that. If they ran over a mine or something like that, it'd blow a road wheel off and what have you, and they'd take pictures of it. Or if it got hit by an RPG go right through a personnel carrier, you know, and it'd rattle around inside a little bit, and they made reports on that. I asked him, I said, I don't want to go back to Fort Benning, you know. And there really wasn't a big aviation thing there. I mean, they had the Lawson Army Airfield, but I said, what would be a good place to go? And he said, Doosa, Davison U.S. Army Airfield is in Fort, okay, having a senior moment, Fort Belvoir.
Okay.
Okay, right outside of DC. All right. So when I was up there, I went to Mount Vernon to look around before I even checked in. And I toured around inside a little bit and stepped out on the back veranda, and it overlooks the Potomac. It's probably as much as 100 feet above the water. And when I stepped out there, I heard some Hueys. And I looked around, and here comes a pair of Hueys. They were in tight formation, 50 feet off the water, and just going as fast as they could. And they were different looking. They had totally white roofs. And the paint was not just that old you know, old OD, you know, it was dark brown, you know, and they were just headed on up the river like they owned the place. And I got out to Davison Army Airfield about 3 or 4 days later, and I looked down the flight line, and here's all these Hueys with the white tops. That's where they came from.
Was there any specific reason they had a white top?
It was just distinction.
Distinction.
Okay. Across the airfield, they had the presidential helicopters, the Sikorskis. Okay. And then next to them, they had fixed wing airplanes that had the white tops also. And they were basically for anybody that wanted to ride that was more than 250 miles in radius from that airfield. We handled the local stuff. And what their mission was to fly VIPs and generals out of the Pentagon.
Okay.
That's where we picked them up. We landed, put the star plates on the side of the helicopter. They came out, and we took them to their destination, New Cumberland Depot, Dover Proving Grounds, anywhere within, you know, Fort Lee, Virginia, places like that. And usually we'd wait on them. And they'd go and take care of their business, and 2 or 3 hours later they'd come back and we'd fly back. So we were their chauffeurs.
So how long were you in the Army?
I was in 5 years and 5 days.
5 years and 5 days. What made you decide to get out? I found myself getting in business with a couple other officers, and they had bought into a business that was kind of like Amway. Okay. All right. And we decided we were going to come to Atlanta and set up shop and what have you. And they had cleaning products instead of plastic bowls, you know. But anyway, that's what motivated me to get out. I'll tell you a little more about it Yeah.
off camera. But anyway, that's what was happening. And when I got out of, they made me XO of the aviation company.
Oh.
Okay, I was a first lieutenant by then. Aviation companies are set up differently from regular companies. They had 425 enlisted men. One cute story while I was executive officer of the aviation company, a lot of them got paid in cash. We tried to convert them to getting a check. And I had the forms and everything right there to get them to sign up for checks. So, I mean, passing out a check is a whole lot easier than counting out $30,000 in cash every month, you know. But I had to have an escort to go over to draw my cash, you know, because I was the paymaster. And one particular day, or, you know, payday, I forgot to assign somebody to meet me the next morning to be my escort. And they'd meet me at 6:30 in the morning at the orderly room. I pulled up there and I said, well, I'll just get the first guy that, you know, looks like he's got good sense and get him to be my escort. Well, I pulled up and here's a Spec 5 sitting on the stoop of the orderly room. And I said, what are you doing here so early? He says, well, I'm going on leave today. I hope to get paid early, you know, so I could go ahead and go on leave. I said, great. I said, you can be my escort, you know? So we went over to the armory and we checked out a couple of 45s and a couple of magazines that had 4 Barney bullets in it. That's all you had in the magazine. So we put on shoulder harness, shoulder holster, and what have you. And I told him, I said, now, when we go over there, they're going to have a 55-gallon barrel. And when you see, and I asked him, I said, hey, you know anything about a 45? He said, yeah. He says, I carried one for a year in Fort Riley, Kansas. I said, oh, it's just getting better and better, you know. So we got over there and I said, well, you're gonna have to clear your weapon, take the magazine out, put it in your pocket, put the gun back in the holster, okay, before you can even go in where they had all the money. And so I said, when you see me do that, you know, he said, you follow right behind me and you clear your gun and put it back in your holster. So I cleared mine, put it back in the holster, and I was about to put my foot on the front step and I hear this BAM! And I said, no, please. And I turned around and he's holding this gun up in the air. And what he did was, he didn't remove the magazine, he just chambered around and held it up in the air instead of pointing it down in the sand in this 55-gallon drum and shot it right over the top of the building.
Oh boy.
And I was turned around, I grabbed his gun, I cleared it, and about this time it sounded like a herd of elephants behind me. And 2 of the biggest MPs with shotguns at high port were coming through those double doors, wanting to know what was going on out there. And I explained that he inadvertently charged his weapon and shot it over the thing. And they said, well, he's going to have to come with us.
Yeah.
So I went in, I drew my money, I counted it out, and I had to wait till 7:30 before the orderly room opened up so I could call them, get them to send another escort over. And so they did, and I got back and I was paying everybody this, that, and the other. Got to be about 4 o'clock and I had this cash and a pay slip. And I said, where is this guy? And I said, oh, I know. This is Mr. I know how to shoot a 45. So I called up the stockade, and I said, what do I need to do to get him out? And they said, just come sign him out, you know. So they had him in a holding cell till 4 in the afternoon, and here he was at 6:30 trying to get there early. Okay, so we're driving back to the company area, and I'm looking over at him, and I said, I thought you said you carried a 45 for a year in Fort Riley, Kansas. He says, well, I did, but I never shot it.
You know, one thing about your story reminds me of this. We got paid cash.
Yeah.
And I remember at this particular time, I don't know if I was in a platoon bay or I had a room. But anyway, I was counting my money. I didn't think it counted right. And then there was 220 stuck. Oh, you know. And then I said, you count your money? Somebody was right. I said, well, you know, I found an extra 20 on mine. You know, in those days, my
20.
pay was
20 was big.
Oh, yes, sir.
$100 bill.
I think I was 55. I was doing around $120 a month, and that $55 of that was jump pay.
Yeah.
You know, and back then we had plenty of money. You know.
Yeah.
But all the other guys, yeah. Then we got it. We keep our mouth shut. You know, we take it right there, and sometimes there was an extra 5 or an extra 1 or an extra 20, and you know, to us that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Phil, I want to thank you very much for driving all the way from Marietta, Georgia to here. You know, unless you talk to veterans, you never know what was going on. You know, doing these things now, I think this is our 15th, 16th that we've done right now. I finally got respect for the Navy. I got respect for the Air Force, you know.
Yeah.
And because you don't know what they do, and
Marines.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
the Marines, you know. I got stories I could tell you about the Marines and the Airborne one time in Turkey and Iran.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, and but I tell you what, you couldn't beat us. That's the thing about it. They couldn't beat us over there. It was. I'm going to ask you a question.
All right.
That I ask all veterans at the end. If you had to do it over again, would you do it?
If I was the same age, I would.
You know what?
I sure would.
I've heard guys say yes, other guys in a heartbeat, you know,
Yeah.
and I would too. I never knew what a veteran really was until I got older. And then I met some of my friends that were veterans, you know, from way back. And I can recall my dad talking to his old friends after they got out. I'm sure you do too. And he said, well, we were in the service together. And I wish, one regret that I wish I would have took names and addresses of
yeah.
a lot of those people.
Absolutely.
I managed to stick with one of them. He was my teammate at Fort Campbell, Frank Orgel. Frank Orgel and Pat Dye, they coached Auburn University.
Oh yeah.
You know, and I met Pat, you know, and Pat wasn't a big man.
Yeah.
Well, I say, he was about my size. I was 235,
Yeah.
but boy, he was good. Only advantage I had over Pat Dye, I was 5 years younger than he was.
Yeah.
And Frank was all SEC lineman, defensive end. You know, and he passed away 2 years ago on Christmas. You know, it's and it's funny when Frank and I go to his house at Auburn, and we talking like we went to service. You stupid idiot, you know, something like that. And his wife just laughing up a storm.
Yep.
And his wife's name was Sarah. I said, Sarah, you could have done a lot better than this guy. You know, and you know, we just laugh, and those were great years.
Yeah.
Phil, thanks a million.
All righty.
Thank you so much for coming down. I'm glad you brought your lovely wife with you. Even though she's a Floridian.
Oh yeah. Sebring.
Oh yeah.
Sebring, Florida.
And nothing wrong with Floridians out there.
That's right.
Folks, I hope you enjoyed this session. We're going to do some more soon. And anyway, listen, if you guys have served, I know some of you guys have served, come and tell us your story. It'll make you feel better. You know, it'll make you younger. when you start thinking about the younger years and all that. So come and tell us. And don't forget, we got a luncheon coming up June the 16th, I think, yeah. Don't forget, June the 16th, so at the I almost said Golden Corral, at the Country Road Buffet. Be there by 10:30, okay? Thank you for attending, and we'll see you at the next session.
'68, the world was turning fast. Phil Reynolds walked the halls, his high school days all past. Baker High's brick walls held memories sweet and true. Little did they know the path that waited just for you. A call to duty echoed, a nation in despair. He traded textbooks in for boots and breathed a different air. Left Columbus town behind, a boy with youthful stride, unknowing of the heavy cost, the battles deep inside. The choppers roared like thunder, blades of whir in frantic beat, over rice paddies green and jungles hot beneath his feet. Vietnam unfolded, a canvas stark and grim, flying missions countless on a wing, and a prayer soaking through valleys veiled in shadow and hills that kiss the sky. He flew where orders sent him, no question asked, no reason why. The dust would swirl and settle on faces young and worn. He saw the fear, the bravery, the lives so quickly torn. He navigated danger through fire and through rain, carrying the wounded, easing their searing pain. There were whispers in the cockpit of places off the map, secret runs at midnight, a deadly silent trap. Stories he kept buried, locked deep within his soul, of shadows in the jungle, beyond official roll. The choppers roared like thunder, blades of whir in frantic beat, over rice paddies green and jungles hot beneath his feet. Vietnam unfolded, a canvas stark and grim, flying missions countless on a wing, and a prayer soaked through valleys veiled in shadow and hills that kiss the sky. He flew where orders sent him, no question asked, no reason why. Then came that searing moment, the flash of blinding light. A bullet kissed his helmet in the fading of the fight. The metal screamed a warning, so close, a breath away. And in that instant clarity washed over him that day. Why was he here, a pilot in this brutal foreign land? For what ideals were they fighting, with blood upon their hand? The youthful fervor shattered, replaced by stark unease. What where revolution brewing carried on the breeze. The choppers roared like thunder, blades of whir and frantic beat, over rice paddies green and jungles hot beneath his feet. Vietnam unfolded, a canvas stark and grim, flying missions countless on a wing, and a press up the through valleys veiled in shadow and hills that kiss the sky. But in his heart the answer changed, he knew he had to fly away. Somehow, someday, by and by, the roar began to fade, a different path he'd seek. Phil Reynolds in that moment knew his spirit couldn't speak the language of the battlefield, the orders from above. He carried those lost missions etched in his heart with love and grief. But the boy who left Baker had found a different truth beneath the whirring rotor blades and the echoes of